is the appalling financial mismanagement of Labour-run Birmingham City Council. After more than a decade of Labour control, their incompetence has led to mountains of uncollected rubbish piling up on every street, so vast that it can be seen from satellites orbiting space. It is nothing short of a disgrace and a damning indictment of Labour's inability to govern.
Have you ever witnessed a Prime Minister so thoroughly dismantled in Parliament that he couldn't speak? Just sat there, jaw tight, eyes frozen, no words, no defence. It wasn't a debate, it was a demolition. Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party and Prime Minister of Britain, faced the kind of political reckoning that shatters careers. One independent MP, armed with facts, fury, and the raw truth, stood up and tore through every illusion Starmer has been selling to the British public. From betrayed pensioners and starving children to a city buried under its own rubbish, nothing was off limits. And by the end, even the Speaker had to step in, not to calm the chamber, but to rescue Starmer from complete collapse. It was meant to be another Prime Minister's questions, another day of carefully stage-managed answers, smug backbench laughter, and the same recycled talking points. Keir Starmer had it all prepared, the statistics, the scripted concern, the worn-out excuses, but what happened instead was unlike anything Parliament had seen in years. A single voice, independent, uncompromised, unafraid, rose from the backbenches and called time on Starmer's performance. No applause, no soft intro, just thunder. Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister has lied to the British public. He's betrayed the very people who believed in him, and he's doing it with a straight face. Gasps, eyes turned, even some Labour MPs shifted uncomfortably, but the MP wasn't done. He leaned into the moment, exposing a list of failures that would make even the most seasoned politician sweat bullets. And Starmer, he couldn't even look up. The MP started where it hurt most, the waspier women. These women, who worked their entire lives with the promise of a state pension, were cheated by a system that moved the goalposts. When they turned to Labour, the party of fairness, supposedly, for justice, they got silence. They were dismissed, betrayed. You promised them justice. You said they mattered. Now, you say we can't afford it. You found 10,000 for train drivers, but you left nurses and pensioners out in the cold. Shameful. Starmer sat there, motionless. He tried to mutter a reply, something about fairness, something about tough decisions, but his voice cracked under the weight of the truth. The MP continued, "You've created a Britain where working-class women are punished for growing old. A Britain where the people who built this country now live in poverty while you chase headlines and court donors. Is this the Labour Party now? A corporation with a red branding?" You could feel the shift in the room. This wasn't just criticism, it was character assassination, backed by undeniable facts and public anger. Starmer wasn't in control anymore. The narrative had slipped out of his hands. The MP raised his hand, and with it, a printed list. Names, dates, broken promises. It was the proof, and it was damning. I've spoken to waspier women who are skipping meals, freezing in their homes, and breaking down in tears, because you, Prime Minister, looked them in the eye and told them justice was coming. Then you walked away. Why? Because it didn't fit your media strategy. At this point, you could hear murmurs from across the chamber. Labour MPs fidgeting, Tory MPs smiling, journalists furiously scribbling. The air was electric, and Starmer looked like a man waiting for it to end. But it didn't end. It got worse. Because next, the MP turned his fire towards something even more recent and even more devastating. Birmingham. A city that symbolised the Labour stronghold, a place Labour promised to protect. And now, it's a disaster zone, streets overflowing with rubbish, services collapsing, a city council that's effectively bankrupt. After over a decade of Labour control, you've turned Birmingham into a warning sign. You've let it rot. Through mismanagement, arrogance and excuses, people are living with mountains of uncollected trash, services are collapsing, and what do? You run from responsibility. He paused. You want to run the country, you can't even run a city. That sentence hit like a hammer, because everyone in the chamber knew it was true. No spin, no deflection, just truth, raw and brutal. Starmer again tried to respond, but his voice, usually calm, rehearsed, steady, was shaky. He spoke of inherited issues, of historic funding problems, but it all sounded hollow. The truth had already landed, and it had hit him square in the gut. The speaker looked uneasy. Even he couldn't pretend this was business as usual, because this wasn't politics, this was exposure, and it was just getting started. The silence in the chamber wasn't just discomfort, it was fear. Fear that the mask was slipping, fear that behind Keir Starmer's polished image and loyally calm was something colder, something calculated. The independent MP didn't hold back. After tearing into the betrayal of WASPy women and the collapse of Birmingham, he turned to the central question. Who is Keir Starmer really working for? Prime Minister, when did the Labour Party stop standing for the people and start standing for power? It was a question that echoed through Westminster, because under Starmer's leadership, Labour has changed, not in whispers but in full view. Grassroots voices silenced, left-wing candidates blocked, local councils ignored, policies flipped, promises buried, loyalty sold. The MP laid out the evidence. He spoke of the deselection of left-wing councillors, community organisers replaced by hand-picked loyalists. He reminded Parliament how Starmer pledged to nationalise rail, energy, water, but then turned around and handed everything to private interests. Promises made to the working class, the unions, the ordinary voter, tossed aside the moment corporate money and media approval came knocking. You're not leading a movement, the MP said. You're managing a brand, and your only loyalty is to the donors behind the curtain. There was no objection, no roar from the Labour benches, just stunned silence. Because again, it was true. And then the MP did something even more dangerous. He named names. He spoke of David Evans, the party's General Secretary, and the silent purge of dissent within Labour ranks. He brought up Labour Friends of Israel and Starmer's absolute refusal to condemn human rights abuses when it didn't suit his agenda. He recalled how Labour MPs were banned from protesting for Palestine, silenced when they tried to speak out against injustice. Starmer claimed neutrality, but the whip of control was everywhere. You've taken a party built on dissent, on solidarity, on protest, and turned it into a top-down machine that punishes truth. And then came the turning point. The MP locked eyes with Starmer and delivered the line that would later dominate the headlines. You lied your way into leadership, and now you're lying your way into number 10. But the truth is catching up to you, Prime Minister, and no amount of branding will save you from it. Gasps, audible ones, because this wasn't Tory spin. It wasn't partisan theatre. It was coming from someone outside the tribal war, someone who once believed in Labour and now stood as its loudest accuser. He spoke of Labour's betrayal on tuition fees, on benefits, on immigration. Each U-turn a dagger in the back of voters who thought they were choosing change. Now, many of them don't even recognise the party they once called home. And the betrayal didn't stop at policy. It went deeper. The MP reminded Parliament of Keir Starmer's role as Director of Public Prosecutions when he oversaw the decisions that led to journalists being prosecuted, while powerful figures walked free. He asked why Julian Assange still rots in prison, while the government Starmer supposedly opposes does nothing. You want to talk about justice? You once stood on the wrong side of it, and now you're standing there again. At this point, even the Conservative front bench was paying attention, not with glee, but with awe, because what they were watching wasn't political point scoring. It was an execution of the old Labour myth, a myth Starmer had cloaked himself in for too long. The MP turned once more to the people outside the chamber, to the millions watching at home, to those who voted Labour hoping for dignity, honesty and fairness, and instead got policies lifted from a corporate boardroom. You're not betrayed by accident, he said. You're being betrayed by design, because this Prime Minister doesn't serve you. He serves power, and he's betting you'll be too tired, too poor, or too distracted to notice. The camera cut to Starmer. He wasn't scribbling notes, he wasn't chuckling, he wasn't even blinking. He was rattled, because everything he'd built, every carefully controlled interview, every filtered soundbite, every photo op with a hard hat and high vis, was crumbling under the weight of one relentless truth. People are suffering, and Starmer is nowhere to be found. The MP sat down to a rare silence. No applause, just stunned MPs staring at a Prime Minister who looked like he'd just been stripped bare. And we're only halfway through. If the domestic failures weren't enough, the MP took a sharp turn, straight into foreign policy, and that's when things got darker. Prime Minister, he began, you speak of international law, but where is your voice when that law is broken? He was talking about Gaza, about Palestine, about war crimes, collective punishment, children buried beneath rubble. And yet, Starmer, the supposed human rights lawyer, the moral statesman, said nothing. Worse, when asked if Israel had the right to cut off food and water to civilians, he said yes. Yes, the word hung in the air like poison, and the MP wasn't going to let it go. You would not condemn the killing of innocents. You would not stand up for the voiceless, because you were too busy protecting your image, too afraid of upsetting donors, too weak to lead. There was murmuring now, rippling across the benches, because this wasn't just about Palestine, it was about the rot at the core of Starmer's leadership. The pattern, the silence in the face of injustice, the loyalty to the powerful, The absolute refusal to take risks for what's right. Where were you, the MP demanded, when the bombs fell on Rafah, when ambulances were turned to ash, when doctors were shot in the street? He paused. You were polishing statements, you were checking poll numbers, you were protecting your career. And then came the blow no one expected. He turned to lobbyists. He pointed to Labour's growing list of donors, private equity firms, arms manufacturers, financial giants, and he asked a simple question. Who really owns the Labour Party? Not the members, not the voters, not the unions, but the same people funding the Tories. He pulled out numbers, reports, names, documents showing the thousands, millions, flowing into Labour from corporate hands. No longer the party of the working class, no longer the opposition, just another brand, another suit, another cog in a broken system. He raised the case of Trevor Chin, the billionaire donor with deep ties to foreign lobbying networks. He raised Labour Friends of Israel, the pressure group with outsized influence over party policy. He listed former advisors now working for corporations and hedge funds. Your foreign policy isn't neutral, the MP said. It's bought, paid for, sanitized. And the worst part, it's not just Gaza. He brought up Ukraine, how Starmer offered support for war but not peace, rhetoric without solutions. He mentioned Yemen, Labour's silence as British-made bombs fell from Saudi planes. He pointed to Africa, where British interests extract resources, and Starmer, like his predecessors, stays conveniently quiet. It wasn't just a critique, it was an indictment, a stripping away of the illusion that Starmer stood for justice. You're not a servant of peace, the MP thundered. You're a servant of the status quo, of empire, of silence in the face of slaughter. And here's where it got deeply personal. The MP reminded the chamber, and the country, how Starmer personally oversaw the extradition of Julian Assange, how his legal office worked to appease US demands, not to protect a journalist, not to defend free speech, but to keep Washington happy. You helped silence a man who exposed war crimes, and now you pretend to care about the rule of law. It was brutal, precise, and devastating, but the MP wasn't done. He turned again to Birmingham, to the very heart of Britain, now in financial collapse, and he asked, why is it easier for this Prime Minister to comment on foreign policy only when it benefits him, but not when British cities are dying? Why is there always money for war, but never for working people? The contrast was stark. Foreign governments got weapons, aid, and diplomacy. Meanwhile, waspy women were begging for justice, and councils like Birmingham were falling apart. Streets in crisis, social care stripped, libraries gone, schools failing, but Starmer, nowhere. Because crisis management didn't fit the narrative, and if it couldn't be turned into a polished speech, it was ignored. People want change, the MP said. Not a quieter Tory party in red, not a manager, not another lawyer who works for the powerful. He looked around. You promised hope, you delivered silence. Starmer still didn't respond, because what could he say? That he didn't know? That he didn't mean it? That his hands were tied? The chamber didn't believe it, and neither did the country, because the truth was becoming clearer by the second. This isn't just about one man, it's about a machine, a system, and a party that once stood for workers but now bends to bankers. And Starmer, he isn't challenging it, he's the face of it. The air in Parliament was thick now, thick with unease, with shame, with something no politician wants to face, truth. And that's when the MP went in for the kill. He shifted from foreign policy to the very people who built this country, the working class, the backbone of Britain, the ones who fought in wars, mined coal, built railways, raised families on poverty wages, and kept entire cities running even as the elites bled them dry. And with a voice full of anger, he asked, what happened to them under your Labour Party, Mr. Starmer? The room fell still, because everyone knew where this was going. The MP didn't hold back. He painted a picture, not of statistics or policies, but of human beings. A single mother in Manchester working 3 jobs, still needing a food bank. A 62-year-old ex-miner in Wales, knees shattered, waiting 5 months for a hospital appointment. A waspy woman in Sheffield, blindsided by pension changes, surviving on scraps after decades of work. You talk about fiscal responsibility, the MP said, eyes locked on Starmer. But what about moral responsibility? Cheers from the backbenches, a few gasps, but Starmer, still frozen. You promised dignity, the MP continued. Instead, you gave them lectures on discipline. You promised security. Instead, you gave them benefit sanctions. You promised investment, but all they got was betrayal wrapped in PR. Then came the numbers. 14 million people in poverty. Over 4 million children going to bed hungry. Record homelessness. Record NHS waiting lists. Record numbers of food parcels. And while the country bled, Labour stood by, silent, complicit, Or worse, agreeing with Tory policies, just with different branding. You didn't oppose the cuts, the MP said. You endorsed them. You didn't defend the strikes. You sacked your own MPs for standing on picket lines. He pointed at the front bench. You promised to renationalise water, energy, Royal Mail. You've now dropped every single one. Every single one. He turned to the public gallery, voice rising. You promised to raise the minimum wage. You backtracked, promised to abolish tuition fees. You U-turned, promised to scrap universal credit. You forgot. Each broken promise hit like a hammer. Not because they were unexpected, but because they confirmed what many already feared. Starmer's Labour isn't about the people, it's about power. Then the MP raised the ultimate betrayal, the WASPy women. He looked Starmer dead in the eyes and said, "How dare you ignore them?" Cheers erupted. These women worked their entire lives, paid in, play by the rules. Then you moved the goalpost and left them with nothing. And instead of standing up for them, you stay silent, you say nothing, because standing up for them might cost you. He read out a letter, a real one, from a 64-year-old woman named Margaret, widow, 2 jobs, lost her home, waiting for justice. She believed in Labour, the MP said. She believed in you. Silence. You broke that trust. He pulled up council records from Birmingham. Social care budgets slashed, youth centres gone, entire communities left to rot. Labour council, Labour silence. How do you explain this? He asked. How can you call yourself a Labour leader when Labour councils are collapsing and your only solution is silence? The betrayal wasn't policy, it was personal. Because Starmer didn't just fail the poor, he abandoned them, walked away from them, rebranded the Labour Party as a corporate-friendly machine where the working class were an afterthought, useful during elections, disposable afterwards. You wear a red tie, the MP growled, but you've got a blue soul. This wasn't theatre, this was a reckoning. People didn't vote for Labour just to get more cuts in a softer voice. They didn't vote for more privatisation wrapped in polished slogans. They voted for justice, for fairness, for help, and you turned your back on them. The room erupted, some in applause, some in outrage, but no one looked away. Because what they were witnessing wasn't just criticism, it was truth-telling in a place built to silence it. And Starmer, still mute, still motionless, because the MP had pulled the mask off completely. And what the public saw wasn't a man of integrity, it was an empty suit, backed by billionaires, shielded by PR, and terrified of his own voters. And that truth is irreversible. Just when you thought it couldn't get darker, it did. Because the MP didn't stop with policy. He didn't just talk about the public. He took us behind the red curtain, into the very halls of the Labour Party itself. People ask, he began, why aren't more Labour MPs speaking out? He paused. They're afraid. And just like that, the room shifted. Fear, that was the word that echoed through the chamber. Not disagreement, not debate, but fear. Of what? Of Starmer, of the leadership, of being purged, smeared, deselected, of being made an example. The MP revealed what many suspected but few dared say out loud. There's a culture of silence inside Labour now. A system of suppression where MPs are told not to challenge, not to question, not to speak for the people, unless the leadership approves it first. He named names, whistleblowers, activists, members, even MPs who raised concerns about injustice, Palestine, welfare cuts, and party democracy, all silenced, all punished, all erased. You want to talk about democracy, Mr. Starmer? The MP asked. You expelled thousands of your own members without trial. You suspended MPs for supporting workers. You banned debates at party conferences. You crushed the left, not with argument, but with force. He quoted Labour officials, internal memos, emails leaked to the press, controlled the narrative, removed dissent, starved the branches of funding, used complaints as weapons, and all of it signed off by a leadership desperate to protect one thing, their power. Then came the names. Diane Abbott, Britain's first black female MP, suspended without process, left in limbo, humiliated in public. Why? The MP thundered. Because she challenged the establishment, because she wouldn't bow to you, because she stood for something. The chamber stirred. Even some Labour MPs looked down. Jeremy Corbyn, former party leader, MP for over 40 years, suspended, then banned. From the party he led to the highest vote share since 1945. And what was his crime? The MP asked. Calling for peace, defending the poor, opposing war. He paused, then answered his own question. His crime was not being you. The room wasn't silent anymore. It was boiling, because what the MP exposed wasn't just internal politics. It was a purge, a calculated campaign to erase any trace of working-class socialism, to replace it with corporate obedience. bank-friendly slogans, safe centrism, a politics designed not to change Britain, but to reassure the elites that nothing would. You didn't just betray the public, Mr. Starmer, the MP said. You betrayed your own party. He listed Labour members who'd been kicked out for tweets, for retweets, for comments made decades ago. But corporate donors, private health lobbyists, foreign agents, welcomed, protected, elevated. Where's the accountability for them, he asked. Where's the integrity you preach about? Then came the bombshell. Secret meetings with weapons contractors, private dinners with financial giants, quiet assurances to the US Embassy that your foreign policy would align with theirs. Whose interests are you protecting? The MP demanded. Because it sure as hell isn't ours. And then, a whisper from the back benches. He's saying what we're all thinking, because finally, someone was putting it all together. The censorship of members, the corporate infiltration, the war on the grassroots, the fear culture in Parliament, and the growing sense that Labour no longer stood for the people, but for profit, power, and PR. You talk about party unity, the MP said, but you've created a party of clones, afraid to speak, afraid to act, afraid to represent the people who elected them. The mask was slipping, and beneath it, Starmer wasn't a man of principle. He was a gatekeeper, a puppet, a politician not of conviction, but of calculation. And let's be honest, the MP added, this isn't about restoring Labour. This is about making Labour safe. For those who own this country, safe for billionaires, safe for oil giants, safe for arms dealers, safe for the same people who destroyed this country under the Tories. That's when the camera panned to Starmer, dead-eyed, motionless, shattered. Because what do you say when every truth laid bare in that chamber exposes your biggest lie? That you were ever on the people's side. The chamber was now electric, charged with the weight of every word, every revelation that had landed like a bombshell in the hearts of those watching. Keir Starmer's mask had cracked, and there was no hiding from the truth. It wasn't just an attack on his leadership anymore. It was an existential question about the very soul of the Labour Party. The MP knew this, and now, as the final act approached, he turned his focus to the one thing left to fight for. The British people. You can talk about Labour's future all you want, Mr. Starmer, the MP began, his voice rising. But you've already sold it to the highest bidder. The future you've built is one of control, where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and working class people are forgotten. Your Labour Party isn't the voice of the people anymore. It's the shield for the establishment. It was a statement so brutal, so honest, that the room seemed to hold its breath. The MP wasn't just speaking about Starmer anymore. He was speaking about every single working man, woman, and child in this country who had been left behind. And he wasn't finished. He moved in closer. For years, the Labour Party was the champion of the people, the voice for the voiceless, the defender of the weak, the bulwark against inequality. But now we watch as the people you promised to protect are ignored, their needs brushed aside, their cries for help met with empty platitudes. And why? Because you've made a deal with the devil, and that devil is the status quo. He paused again, looking directly at Starmer. It was as if he could see the guilt written all over the Labour leader's face, even if it was buried beneath layers of manufactured composure. And the people know it, the MP continued. The people are waking up. They see through the lies. They see that Starmer is nothing more than a puppet for big business, a willing tool of the corporations that have been robbing the British public blind for decades. But this time, Mr. Starmer, you won't get away with it. Not this time, because the people are done being silenced. And just like that, the MP's words shifted. He was no longer just holding Starmer accountable, he was calling for action. You've been in power for too long, Starmer, and you've shown us who you really are, but it's not too late. The British people aren't stupid. They can see the cracks in the facade, and they're ready to take action. The time is coming for the real Labour Party, the one that fights for working class people, the one that doesn't bow down to billionaires, the one that doesn't sell out to private interests. It was a warning, a challenge, a call to arms, but it was also a message of hope. For years, the establishment told us we were powerless, that we could never change things, that we had to accept the status quo, no matter how broken it was. But look around, Mr. Starmer. Look around. The tide is turning. People are waking up to the fact that we don't have to accept your lies, your betrayal, and your failure. The people will rise. They're ready to take back their future, and they'll do it without you. The MP stepped back, almost daring anyone in that chamber to disagree. You had your chance, Starmer, and you squandered it. The people are no longer waiting for a saviour. They're creating their own revolution, one that's going to change everything. And you'll be nothing more than a footnote in a history written by the people. He turned to the audience. So let me ask you, Britain, do you want to be a part of this revolution? Do you want to continue living in a country where the elite hold all the power and the rest of us suffer the consequences? Or will you stand up, speak out, and demand something better? Because it's time. It's time to take back control. The MP's voice boomed through the chamber, his final words hanging in the air like a rallying cry for the oppressed, the forgotten, and the betrayed. This is the moment. The future of Britain is in our hands. The fight starts now. And with that, the MP walked away, leaving Keir Starmer and the entire House of Commons to reflect on what had just been said. Starmer sat there, his expression unreadable, but it was clear that the impact of those words had landed. The battle for Britain's future wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Keir Starmer might have sat there, trying to maintain his composure, but the truth was clear. His leadership, his promises, his carefully crafted image of the saviour of Britain had been obliterated in one moment by a single, fearless voice. What the MP exposed wasn't just a series of broken promises. It wasn't just a few political missteps. It was a fundamental failure of leadership, a betrayal of the very people Starmer promised to protect. The WASPI women, the pensioners, the working class, they've all been discarded in favour of power plays and backroom deals. But here's the bigger question. What happens next? Because while Starmer may have weathered the storm in that chamber, the cracks in his facade are undeniable. The people of Britain are waking up, seeing through the lies and starting to demand something different, something better. This isn't just about one MP exposing the truth. This is about a country on the brink of a major shift. The people who've been ignored for too long are now finding their voice, and as they rise, they'll no longer accept the status quo. They'll demand leadership that puts them first, not the corporations, not the elite, not the political machine. Starmer might try to hide behind his speeches and focus groups, but there's no escaping the reality. The people are watching. They're waiting for a leader who will truly fight for them, who will honour their trust and put their needs above political games. And if Starmer continues down this path of betrayal, he won't just lose the next election, he'll lose the support of the very heart of Britain, because people have had enough. They're ready for change. The question is, will Starmer hear them before it's too late? The battle for Britain's future has only just begun, and it's clear now. The people will decide. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over.